I have so much to talk about. I don't even know where to start. But let's just start from today. So like I said, this is day 3 of my 15-day fast. So let's focus more on what the Lord spoke to me this morning. So I woke up this morning and, I make sure my phone don't get hot. I'm not going to be able to use it. But I woke up this morning and I'm kind of turned a little weird, y'all. I'm sorry if I'm not looking in the camera. But I woke up this morning. I was getting up. It was around 6 o'clock. I woke up a little late. And I was about to get up out the bed and help my kids get ready for school when, as I was laying down, the Lord just said, wait a minute, say a prayer before you get up. And so I said, okay, even though I was thinking in my head, it's time for me to go to get the kids ready. But I said, okay, let me say a quick prayer. And I just said a really quick prayer. And I said the prayer. And as I was sitting there, the Lord spoke and he said the words, 11th hour. And then right after that, he said, 11th driver. And I opened my eyes and I said, 11th hour, 11th driver. What does that mean? And I said, Lord, you need to make this clear and plain. I don't know what that means. Like, I've heard of 11th hour, but I don't just know off the top of my head, like, what it's referring to. And I heard the Lord just clearly say, Google it. Now, if y'all don't know that God is the God of technology, I want you to know that God is the God of technology. He's not some God that's stuck in year 200 BC. Like, he knew about all of this technology before we ever did. He knows about the technology that's coming later. God is a God of technology. Don't think he's sitting there and he's just ignorant to all of our devices. He's ignorant about what you're doing on social media. He's ignorant about everything. The Lord knows everything. He knows the minds of those who created these technologies. He knows our minds as we're using the technologies. Don't think he's ignorant about this stuff. And he wants us as Christians to be able to use the technologies that are out there for, our benefit, for the benefit of others, for the benefit of establishing his kingdom, for the benefit of getting his word out. Like, use the resources at our disposal, the same resources that the world is using to do what he's called us to do, right? And so he specifically told me to look that up. And so I put out my phone as I was laying in bed, thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these kids, they really need to go to school. They really need to get ready for school. But I was like, you know what? This is more important. Let me do what the Lord is telling me to do. And so I Googled 11th hour. And when I Googled 11th hour, what came up was, I can actually pull it up, I think. Hold on, let me pull it up. Okay, so I typed in 11th hour, and when I typed in 11th hour meaning came up. And so I clicked on 11th hour meaning, and as soon as you click on it, it says 11th hour is an idiom that means the last possible moment to do something or just before it's too late. For example, you might say to change plans at the 11th hour. So the last possible moment to do something. And I began to think to myself, okay, is that what the Lord is trying to tell me? That I'm doing something at the last possible moment? And I began to ask questions of the Lord, like, is that what you're trying to say? I know that I'm procrastinating, Lord, but I think I've been doing a little better lately, getting the stuff on time. Or are you trying to tell me something? But in my spirit, I didn't feel like that's what God was trying to tell me. So when you're trying to hear from God, get your spirit right. Get your spirit to those of us who have the Holy Spirit, who have Holy Spirit inside of us. As you're asking the Lord what he wants from you, see if there's an agreement in your spirit with whatever you're reading or whatever you're hearing. And I didn't feel an agreement in my spirit that that's what the Lord was saying to me. And an agreement in your spirit kind of feels almost like a jump in your spirit. It feels almost like a quickening. When you hear it or when somebody says it, it's like you get this feeling in your heart where it's like, that's right. Something is agreeing in your spirit with whatever they're saying, and you feel this where you just know that that's God speaking to you, where something in your spirit agrees with it. And so I didn't feel anything reading that. So I didn't think that was it. And so I kept looking. And as I kept going down this first page of Google, I saw where it says that there's a biblical meaning from it. And so I clicked on that to try to see what I was missing. I grew up in church, but sometimes I get confused with these Bible stories sometimes. And I couldn't remember an 11th hour Bible story, probably because I didn't never focus on the fact that it was at the 11th hour. Because when I read the Bible story, I said, okay, yeah, I remember that. I just never focused on the 11th hour in the story. And so when I clicked on it, and I didn't actually go to the Bible, I just basically was looking at what's coming up on Google. And on vocabulary.com under 11th hour, it says that things that happen at the 11th hour occur just in the nick of time, right before it's too late. Don't wait until the 11th hour to study for your vocabulary quiz. So it's something that happens in the nick of time. And so I kept reading, and it says, the phrase 11th hour has a biblical origin. It comes from a parable in Matthew in which a few last-minute workers hired long after the others are paid the same wage. Despite being brought on the job after 11 hours of hard vineyard work, they were not too late. Okay, and I think I clicked on another one just to get some more insight. Let me see what I clicked on. Hold on, y'all. Let me pause it. So, y'all, I can't find what I was reading, but I'm going to just try to sum it up for y'all. But if you want to read the story, go to Matthew chapter 20, and you will see what I'm talking about. It's the parable of the vineyards. So a guy hired some workers to go and work for him in the fields, and he had a certain amount that he was going to pay them for working in the fields. And these men worked all day. They worked all day. In the 11th hour, which was the last hour that they worked, some men were idling about. They were wandering about because they hadn't been hired to work. And the person who owned the field asked the men, and I'm paraphrasing, y'all, I might not be exactly right, but he asked the men who were idling about why they were idling about, why were they not doing any work? And the men said, because no one has hired us. And so the man said, go ahead and work for me. And so the men started working. The men only worked for an hour compared to what the men who had already been working worked. So these new men worked for 1 hour, while the other men had worked for 11 hours. When it was time for the owner to pay the men for working, he gave them all the same pay. And of course, you know what happened next. The men who worked 11 hours were furious because why are you paying them the same amount that you're paying us when they only worked 1 hour and we worked all day? Like, why should they get the same amount of money that we're getting? And the owner replies to them in so many words, didn't you agree for this payment? Why are you worried about what the other person has when you agreed to this payment? I didn't make you take the payment. You agreed to this payment. So worry about yourself. What I choose to give a worker who worked 1 hour has nothing to do with what I gave you because you agreed to it. And so that's basically the parable. And so I began to think about that, because it started to agree in my spirit. Okay, this could be what God is talking about. He's talking about his word, and he's bringing his word back to me and telling me to focus on the 11th hour. And as I began to talk to my husband about that, and I'm going to get to the 11th driver, the other thing that the Lord spoke to me, but let me just finish this one. So as I began to talk to my husband about that, we began to talk about it, and I began to tell him, and I said to him, this reminds me of when Pastor Joel, our pastor, was preaching the other day about Naomi, and this is a sermon that I talked to my husband about, even though he wasn't there that Sunday. I actually talked to him about it because it stuck with me, and it was about how Naomi and y'all don't make me mess the story up. So who worked for Naomi? Y'all can't even remember who worked for Naomi. Y'all, listen. Don't judge me. Don't judge me. I've been in church all my life, but sometimes I get these names mixed up. But anyway, so let me find out the Naomi story. It was Naomi's daughter-in-law, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, Ruth. So Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law, and I'm going to tell y'all this story just to kind of pull everything together, and just to tell y'all how God works. So I had just recently heard this story again at Sunday. I think 2 weeks ago, I heard this story in a sermon by Pastor Joel, and I will actually tag that sermon down below so y'all can go check it out because it was a really good sermon. And it was the best. The title of the sermon was basically "Who Are Your Naomis?" Because Ruth, Naomi's daughter-in-law, who was widowed, she had lost her husband, and her husband was Naomi's son. Ruth decided to work in the fields for Naomi, decided to go and try to get them some money, work in the fields. And so when Ruth went to work in the fields, the owner of the fields had such compassion on her that instead of her going out to work the fields, which is what they were commended to do, and Pastor Joel can explain this a little, even better than me. I'm not going to go into the details of what he talked about, but instead of her working the fields, which was what she was supposed to do, I mean, the fields were open for her to go work in for free. She could go work and get her own stuff, but she could get that stuff for free, but she had to work for it, basically. Well, the owner of the fields had such compassion on her that she was actually doing this work for somebody else other than herself, that he actually told his hired men who he had hired to work the fields for him to actually do the work for her, so that when she went to pick up the stuff that she needed, the food that she needed, that she wouldn't have to do any work, that it'll just be there. The work would already have been done, and she could just pick it up and take it home for her and Naomi, or to sell, or whatever she wanted to do with it. So basically, she came in and she didn't do any work the way she was supposed to do work. It was basically done for her, and all she had to do was go in and pick up the spoils, go in and pick up the goods. You know, she didn't have to work for it. It was basically given to her. She had mercy and compassion bestowed upon her, grace. And so I'm going to try to finish this really, really quick. And so that reminded me of that story, because here in the 11th hour, these workers, they didn't do much work. You know, other workers had done a lot of work, but they came in and they hadn't done much work. But they still got the same pay. And the Lord began to speak to me in that moment and began to say that just like you were Ruth in that story, because Pastor Joel talked about us being Ruth and actually finding our Naomis, the people who we are supposed to help in life in order to find out what God wants us to do. Just like the Lord began to speak to me and say, just like you're Ruth in this other story in the 11th hour with the vineyards, you are those men who came in the 11th hour. And what did they do in the 11th hour? They didn't do much work. They stepped in. A lot of work had already been done, but they still got paid the same wage. They still were blessed just like everybody else was blessed. And I began to feel like the Lord was saying to me, look, not only are we in the 11th hour because we're nearing the end, but in this 11th hour, you're going to step in and it's time for you to do the work. And I'm not just talking about myself. Don't get it twisted now. He was speaking to me, but I know he was speaking to so many other people. So many other people, I believe, who are probably around my age, a little older, a little younger. You know who you are. It's our time to step up. It's the 11th hour. We're stepping into the game. These other people who went before us, they've done a lot of the work. They've done a lot of the work. But we're going to step in and we're going to reap the same rewards that they've reaped. Even though we're going to walk into this thing and we're going to be blessed beyond measure. God is getting ready to bless us beyond measure. And get me now, this is a prophetic word. I believe it is a prophetic word for a lot of us. He's getting ready to bless us beyond measure, but we got to step out and start doing the work. Because remember, even though they didn't do as much work as the other people, they still did a very important work. A work that the owner acknowledged. A work that the owner acknowledged and said, this is good work. So good that I'm going to pay you just what I paid the other people who came before you, who worked for way longer. So I see through this of what the Lord was telling me, provision for us in this season. You know, don't think to yourself that we don't have enough. I know inflation is bad right now, but don't think to yourself that we don't have enough, because there is provision. We just have to believe and receive that this is what the Lord is speaking is true. And let me hurry up and get to the next part. So the next part was the 11th driver, and I couldn't understand that. And I typed in 11th driver in Google and didn't come up with much. And the Lord spoke to me and he said, type in 11th driver in the 11th hour. And so I typed in 11th driver in the 11th hour. And what came up was something that I didn't even know. So what came up was 11 hours for truck drivers. You know, truck drivers in the 11th hour. They or truck drivers, when they've been driving, they can only drive 11 hours because after 11 hours, you tend to get fatigued and you tend to make rash decisions. You tend to make decisions that are not great for you while you're driving. So it's illegal. It's a misdemeanor for them to keep driving past 11 hours. And the Lord began to speak to me as I talked to my husband, Darius, and he began to say, look, this goes right with what I told you about this parable of the vineyards. There are people, those people who've been working for 11 hours, those people in the vineyards, those people, it's time for them to sit down somewhere. It's becoming to be the 11th hour. Their time has passed. It's time for them to sit down because they're about to start making decisions that are not the right decisions, which is why I'm bringing a new thing in. I'm bringing my new people in. I'm bringing my usually younger people in. You know, I'm 37, but I feel like God is talking to some people who are a little younger, some people who are a little older. Like he's talking to a certain group of people. And he's saying, those of you who have been working the fields for a long time, thank you. You will get paid. But it's time for this new generation to step up. So you millennials out there, you older millennials out there, who are the ones above us? I don't even know who they're called. Who are my parents called? Them too. Like God is calling you to step up if you have not stepped up. We've gotten real comfortable with not doing what God has told us to do. And so that's my word today because my phone is about to die, y'all. But that's my word. That's what the Lord told me to give to y'all. Peace. Be blessed. I love y'all. And bye, y'all.